now. All right. Well, we finished up the other day talking about the 5 basic warrantless searches. Just for a real quick reminder, talked about the stop and frisk, talked about Terry versus Ohio. That's a case that you should probably remember as you go through the different classes, because that'll come up again in criminal law, it'll come up again in judicial process. It may even come up, it'll definitely come up in CJ 410, crim evidence and procedure, and it'll come up in problems and practices. It's a concept that's very important to being a police officer. So we talked about stop and frisks, talked about vehicle searches briefly, we talked about plain view. Plain view. What's an important concept with a plain view search? It has to be an inadvertent find. You can't move things around to make something be in plain view. So in other words, you got to walk in the room and it's right there in front of you, an inadvertent discovery. We talked about consent searches. I told you my personal favorite. If I had to choose between consent and plain view, it'd be a tough choice, because those are the types of searches that you will be conducting and the type of things that you will be doing as a beat cop, as a patrol officer. And we talked about that search incident to arrest and also inventory searches. And it's in the notes and it's in the book. They talk about it in the book. I just want to spend a couple minutes today talking about exigent circumstances, because this is another type of warrantless search that we tend to conduct at different times. And there's a couple different ones. There's a lot of different types of exigent circumstances that exist, but we're going to talk about just the main ones as they apply to certain aspects of police work. And once again, these are warrantless searches. If we can justify these particular set of circumstances, then we can conduct that warrantless search, and whatever we find can be used against the person that we are investigating, or whoever turns out to be the focus of our investigation. There's a couple different circumstances within that definition of exigency, and you're going to see this just in a couple of the cases that I will bring up. Has to be some type of danger. Here's the most important one right here. Evidence faces imminent destruction. And you're going to see there's a couple of cases that kind of talk about that, if evidence is about to be destroyed. And I couldn't find that video clip from Goodfellas, so I'll try to find that again for Friday. Or somebody may escape. It's the urgency of the incident that justifies the warrantless intrusion. Now, hot pursuit is the first type of exigency that we tend to be involved with. I can remember, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to talk about the housekeeper and the heart attack in a minute, because that kind of talks about a couple different types of these warrantless type searches. This case right here, the Santana case, really defined what hot pursuit was, and talks about how the police can chase somebody into their home without a warrant. This could be, this case came out of, it was a robbery that occurred, and the police were given the description of a suspect. And male whatever, let's say male black, because I can't remember what the race was, male black, wearing black cover, green and white shirt and khaki pants. So they have the description, they're searching the area, boom, there's the guy that matches that description walking down the street. Police get out of their car, he sees the police, he takes off running. Turns out he was walking back to his apartment. The police chased him up the stairs in his apartment building. He ran into an apartment building, into a door for an apartment. The police crashed in and apprehended him in his apartment. And that was the Santana case that was considered to be a hot pursuit, because they had identified him as the suspect. And it was this category right here that if they did not chase him, was he going to be able to maybe climb out a window of the apartment and escape if they didn't come in that door? Yeah. So that's how they were able to justify it. All right, let's talk about this one right here, because this was one of our big cases of that year, not 1963. I'm not that old, but this happened in about the early 90s, about 91, 92. A housekeeper that was working in a pretty big house, like a 4 or 5 bedroom house, called up and called 911 and said, "I'm having a heart attack. I'm not feeling good. I'm having a heart attack." She's like in her 60s. So the ambulance responds to a medical emergency. And in our agency in Lake County, anytime an ambulance was sent to a medical emergency, they dispatched a beat car. Because as we talked about when we discussed patrol, patrolmen are always out, supposed to be out in their zones, driving around. They are accessible to respond to calls like this quickly. So in our agency, the patrol division would beat the ambulance and the fire service to every single call. I think in 25 years I remember one time when the ambulance got there before we did. And that was because we were tied up on a bunch of other things and we didn't have any officers free. But most of the time, if not all the time, we would send a police car to that house. That's why in my police career I did CPR like 20 times, because they'd send us on ambulance calls, somebody would be down and out, and we'd get there first, initiate CPR, start doing what we had to keep them going until the paramedics arrived. So I did CPR quite a bit. So 911 call, housekeeper calls up, she's having a grabber. The police respond to the house, ambulance right behind them, about 2 or 3 minutes behind. Front door was open, and this is a medical emergency, so the officer just walks in the front door, doesn't have to announce himself, he just walked in the front door. There's the housekeeper sitting slumped against the wall right outside the kitchen. She's still alive. So she's holding her heart, she's obviously having a heart attack. There's symptoms that you can look at somebody and tell they're having a heart attack. She was having trouble breathing, she had pain like on the left side of her body, she was diaphoretic, which means she was kind of like cold, clammy, and sweaty. And she looked like she was going out. So the officer arrives, starts doing some preliminary first aid. Paramedics right behind him come in. And as the officer's in the house, he's smelling a strange odor. And what he's smelling is what he believed from his experience and training as a police officer to be. He believes that he is smelling burnt cannabis and possibly fresh cannabis. It smelled overwhelming. It smelled like the back of Cheech and Chong's van in the movie Up in Smoke, is what it smelled like when I got to that house later. So he smells burnt pot in the house. Does anybody know what that smells like? Don't answer that, but think to yourself. If you know what that smells like, if you smelled it once, if you smell it 1,000 more times, you'll know what it smells like, because it's got a very distinct odor and aroma. When cannabis burns, it doesn't smell like tobacco. It doesn't smell like burning leaves. It smells like pot, and you know what that smell is. So he knows that smell. He smelled it. He's like, man, this is crazy. Somebody was just getting high in this house before I got here. Well, it wasn't the housekeeper because she's on the ground. So as the paramedics are doing their thing on her, they ask her, one question they would ask her is, are you taking any medicine of any kind? And she says, she croaks out, yes, my nitro tablets are upstairs in the master bathroom on the sink, in the master bedroom on the sink in the bathroom. You guys know what that is, nitro tablets for a heart attack? In the old days, even today, you'll take a nitroglycerin tablet. If people experience some type of arrhythmia with their heart and it feels like pain in your heart, like it's not beating properly, they would have a nitroglycerin tablet that they would consume under their tongue. They would just pop it under their tongue. This medicine would dissolve real quick, get in the bloodstream, and it would stop that arrhythmia and stop the heart attack from happening until they get to the hospital. So she says, my nitro tablets are upstairs. I couldn't get up the stairs to get them. So the paramedic looks at the officer and says, officer, upstairs, get that medicine and bring it down here for her right now, because they didn't carry nitro on the ambulance for people. They carried everything else, but they didn't carry that. So officer runs upstairs, goes in the master bedroom, and it's a gigantic bedroom. He goes in, and as he walks in, it's like Cheech and Chong's. You guys know what Cheech and Chong is? You know Cheech and Chong? We know who Cheech and Chong is, right? It's like Cheech and Chong's bedroom. There's pot plants every place. There are baggies of pot that has been cultivated, dried, and chopped, like big quart Ziploc baggies. There's like smaller little baggies. So these people were obviously in the side business of growing their own pot and then packaging it and selling it. Literally, we did not know about them in this particular community, so that it was happening. So the officer sees this, but his primary responsibility was to get that medicine down to that lady, and that's what he does. So brings that medicine back down to her. They give her the pill. She feels better. They load her up on the stretcher. They're going to take her to the hospital. They leave, and the officer stays. He did not search that house, however. What he did was called for a supervisor. The supervisor responded, saw the situation. We immediately secured the house, and detectives came, and we did a scene survey and said, wow, look what we've got. We wanted to be able to search the entire house, so we wrote up a quick affidavit of probable cause, went up to the district attorney's office. They helped write up a search warrant for us, went before a judge. We were back there within 2 hours with a search warrant to search the entirety of that house. We took more drugs out of that house than I can even remember. It took 4 or 5 of us about a couple of hours to carry all and we videotaped it too, to carry all the plants and the baggies and stuff like that. It was a young couple. They were in their early 30s. They had a couple of kids. And I think that the husband was salesman. The wife had like a business. She sold cosmetics and stuff like that. But they were making their money off their drug business. And they'd been in that house and growing and selling pot for about 1.5 years, we found out during the investigation. So here, we come into this house. Street value of the pot in this house, probably a couple $1 million, maybe more. And we stumbled in, basically just coming there to help somebody that was having a heart attack. This is considered an exigent circumstance. It was a well-being check. And you will do these all the time as a patrolman. Somebody will call in from Colorado and they'll say, well, I haven't heard from my daughter for a couple of weeks. Can you send an officer by to check the house to see if she's okay? And we do that. And if we're sent on a well-being check, somebody calls in and says, please do this. If we're walking around that house and we find an open door, guess what we get to do? We get to go in and search, because we're searching for that person to see if she's okay. If we find evidence of a crime, or if we find other types of contraband, that'll be a good search for us because we have a legitimate reason for being there. So we have those well-being type checks. We have hot pursuit. I think hot pursuit kind of explains itself. If there's a danger to others. I remember a case where it was midnight shift, and when there's nothing happening out there and somebody screams in a neighborhood on midnight shift, you kind of hear it like far away. For some reason, noise travels better at night. So somebody called in from this little neighborhood. Actually, I remember the name of the neighborhood. It was called Codfish Town for some reason. This little neighborhood right on the lake. And they say, I hear a woman screaming. And you get calls like this all the time as a policeman. Somebody's screaming, somebody's doing this. So a couple officers are dispatched to the area. There's like 2 or 3 of us. We get down there. We hear like screaming every now and then. And we figure what house it's coming from. And we respond to the house. We get there, but nobody's screaming. But we kind of push in the door, and not to make a joke about it, but it was screams of passion, not screams of terror or murder or anything like that. It was really loud too. So we determined what it was, but we were in the house before we were able to figure out what the problem was. And we were in that house with guns drawn because we hear somebody screaming. Our assumption is that somebody's getting murdered. Nobody was getting murdered, but they were still being pretty loud. And they were pretty embarrassed about it, as well they should have been. So nobody got arrested, nobody got murdered. But let's say I'm in that house, and it was a little house, probably about the size of this classroom, a couple of bedrooms, little kitchen. And let's say I'm in that house, and I push that door in because I'm thinking somebody's in that house getting murdered. and I'm there to check it. Somebody's called that complaint in. I've identified that house as where I need to investigate my complaint. And I'm walking through that house, and I see contraband of some kind, illegal drugs on the counter. Can I seize that and investigate it? Yes, because I'm there for a lawful reason. I'm there for a lawful reason. See, sometimes when you're looking at these things, you have to be able to identify and articulate these circumstances and explain them later. You do what you have to, and then you explain things later sometimes when it comes to this. All right, so hot pursuit, we just talked about that. I made the comment before, and maybe some people in the legal profession would disagree with me. I was a police officer, and if I want to go on private property, I'm going to go on private property. I don't care. I'm going to do what I have to do. If something's not going to be able to be used later on, then I lose the evidence. But I'm going to investigate. I'm going to go on private property. I'm going to go in your backyard. If I have a reason to, I'm going to go in your house, and I'm going to do what I have to do. That's the mentality, I think, personally, the gospel according to Officer Palbicki, that you have to have. All right. Let's look at this one. This was just kind of another example of you walk up to the front door. Is it illegal to have pot in the state of Kansas? Yeah. There's no legalized pot in the state of Kansas. I doubt there ever will be. This is a pretty conservative state. A lot of states, however, are on the verge of legalizing it in addition to Colorado and Washington. Nevada, Massachusetts, and there's a couple other states that are pretty close to legalizing it. Oregon, I think, is pretty close to legalizing it. So in those states, if I smell cannabis burning as I approach an apartment, I can't really call that something that I'm going to kick a door in or do something like this just because I smell cannabis burning. This is an old case a couple of years ago because it was before cannabis was legalized in a couple of these states. So if I'm in Colorado and I smell pot burning, that's not necessarily going to give me the right to push a door open and enter and conduct a warrantless search. If it's in Kansas, however, if they smell it burning in your dorm room, the campus cops are walking down, and they smell pot, and they can see the smoke coming out from under your dorm room, guess what? You're in a heap of trouble because it's illegal here. And even in the state of Colorado, at the colleges have the right to make it illegal on college campuses. And that's kind of the case at Northern Colorado, I think. I think that's the university, where it's still illegal to consume it on campus, on college grounds. So if we see here that there's something going on, if I walk up to an apartment door and sounds like somebody's just getting the living daylights beat out of them on the inside of the house, yeah, I'm going to enter that house because then somebody might be in danger. And there's case law that says I can do that as a police officer. That's where we talk about that grave endangerment to the lives of others. We can do what we have to. And as a police officer, I always said, well, it's better to save a life than to do nothing and not save that life. So when we talk about, that's what I want to talk about right there. I never really encountered this, and this is why I want to look at that video clip from that one movie. But if I'm chasing somebody or if I'm talking to somebody and there's some possibility that if I don't get into that structure, if I don't get into their car, if I don't get into their shed in their backyard, that evidence is going to be destroyed or made unavailable to me. If there's imminent destruction of that evidence, then I don't need a warrant to search that whatever for that evidence. I have to have some idea that it's there, and what is that idea? Some kind of probable cause that indicates that there might be drugs that could be destroyed. So I have to be able to articulate that that particular set of circumstances might exist. So we have a couple different categories here. We have dangers to life, we have dangers of escape, we have dangers of removal or destruction of evidence. We have that well-being check, and went on these all the time. Well, let's look at that well-being check a little bit. I'm sent to a house to check on whoever, and I'm walking around the outside of the house. And as I'm walking around the outside of the house, I don't see anybody laying dead on the floor, but as I'm peeking in the kitchen window, which is at eye level from the outside, and remember I have a lawful reason for being there, let's say I see something obviously illegal, a huge pile of pot sitting on the kitchen counter. Can I break a window to get in there and search further? Probably not, but I am going to have probable cause to get a warrant. And I'm going to have probable cause to get that warrant and search that house because I have identified that as possibly being illegal drugs. Now, what kind of a search would be better to do at that point, if you can? A consent search. Consent search. So, see how these things they kind of meld together sometimes in terms of this. Yeah, we talked about that. Let's talk about this protective sweep just for a minute. I use the example: we get a search warrant, and the search warrant is good for the bedroom. I'm not going to draw the house. The search warrant is good for the bedroom on the second floor at the end of the hall. But I'm going into this house, and I know there's like a real schmuck that lives there. This kid is a gangbanger, and he's got all kinds of gangbanger buddies, and they've had issues with violence before. I'm allowed to search that house to make sure that there's nobody hiding in the bathroom that's going to shoot me when I'm walking into that bedroom to search for whatever I'm authorized to search for. Now, I can't tear the place apart doing a protective search. There's very few places that a human body is going to be able to hide in the house anyway. So we can go and look in bedrooms, shine light under the bed, maybe pop a closet door open just to make sure that there's nobody waiting for us to do us harm when we come there to serve that warrant. Most people that we serve warrants on for search warrants, do you think they know we're coming? No, they don't know we're coming because they're under investigation. They may know they're under investigation, and it's pretty easy if they're sitting upstairs in their bedroom and they see 9 or 10 officers wearing vests, carrying shotguns, and somebody with the big battering ram coming up. I think that they're going to be able to assume that they're not there to sell them a magazine subscription. They're there for business. And at that point, officers' lives could be in danger. Officers' lives could be in danger. So we're allowed to check, just doing that protective sweep to be able to check. But once again, we have to identify our probable cause. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? We kind of talked about that. We talked about the housekeeper. Oh, by the way, once that case was, that house was completely emptied out of evidence, we identified the homeowners. They lost their children for 6 months because of this. Their kids were taken away from them. They went to jail until they got out and were able to bond out. They wound up losing their house because we, as a police agency, once we saw the quantity of dope in this house, we called the drug enforcement guys, and then they came out and took over that case, and they did the asset forfeiture, they did the arrest. We just wrote supplemental reports that said what we saw when we got there. The drug guys, they came and they made that arrest. They took their house away from them. Matter of fact, I think they took their car because the guy had drugs in his car. They really shredded this family pretty good. They got their kids back, and they left the state after their case was concluded. But that was a biggie for us. That was a biggie because there was a lot of dope in that house, a lot of drugs. I wanted to talk about this concept also, just for a minute, because with technology, there's going to be problems sometimes with the technology that we use. So I run somebody on the computer, and I make a stop, legitimate stop. I run them on a computer. Let's say I stop them just for a traffic violation, speeding. Run their name, and it comes back that they're wanted on a warrant. Well, we have a protocol that we go through to verify that warrant. And it's making sure he is who he says he is, making sure he's that same person. And that's mainly name, date of birth, and other identifiers. When we enter warrants, if I know you have scars or marks or tattoos that are unique to you, we enter them on the warrant, and that goes in the computer. So if there's any question, I pull you over, and, Joe Blow, date of birth, January 1st, whatever, and that warrant's going to have, look for the skull and crossbones tattoo on his left arm and then mom on his right arm. So we're going to pull the sleeves up. Don't need a warrant to do that. You got skull and crossbones and mom, you're my guy. So we go through a protocol of making sure we know who's wanted for that warrant. So I stop you, got you a computer warrant, a warrant in the computer for you. I get you out of that car. I make sure it's you. I hook you up. All the time you're screaming at me, but that warrant was quashed. That warrant, I went to court a year and a half ago. That's not a warrant for me anymore. It's no good anymore. That's out of the computer. Well, sorry, dude. I'm looking at my computer screen right now and it's saying warrant for you. So you're under arrest. So let's say later on, he goes to court and it turns out the charges that the warrant was depicted in that warrant, he was right. That warrant was quashed a year and a half ago when he went to court. So fine, whatever. I'm just arresting him on a warrant. But what do I do when I arrest somebody like that, hook them up and bring them in? What am I going to do? I'm going to pat them down, right? I'm going to search them and see if they got stuff on them, see what they got. So I arrest him on a bad warrant. We're going to call it invalid, but it's a bad warrant, not because of anything I did. So I'm patting him down, and in his pocket, he's got a dozen little baggies of Coke in his pocket. I'm like, oh, you're in trouble because I got you on the warrant and I got the drugs in your pocket. So I arrest him for possession of what is later shown to be cocaine. So he goes to court on a warrant. The warrant's thrown out. What happens to that cocaine charge? Is that still a good charge? The answer is yes, because I was acting in a reasonable manner as the police officer by looking at my computer and seeing that that warrant was still listed as a valid and enforceable warrant. It was in my computer. So I can make that arrest and I'm good to go because I followed my protocols and rules and regs from my department, and even though that arrest was later invalid, whatever he had on him, he was still going to have to answer for. This happens all the time. Warrants are not taken out. When you go to get a warrant, you bring it back to your agency. Or like if you work here in Shawnee County, you're a Topeka guy, Topeka officer, you'll have that warrant entered by your records department. They'll sit in front of a computer and they'll enter that warrant. When you arrest that person later, that warrant is supposed to be taken out of the computer. If records is running behind by a couple of months in terms of taking warrants out of the computer, that warrant's going to remain active in that computer, even though it's no longer a valid warrant. But I don't know that. Officer Palbicki, when he drives through Kansas City and I have that Topeka warrant still pop up, I'm still going to arrest him. And he's still going to go to jail until he goes to court and proves that warrant was not valid. This happens all the time. What about a suspended driver's license? Is your driver's license, when it's suspended, is it suspended forever? No, it's suspended for a very short amount of time, usually 3 or 6 months. It's a temporary loss of driving privileges. If the state of Kansas is behind in terms of revalidating driver's licenses after they've been suspended, let's say his license was suspended as of January 1st for 3 months, January, February, March. As of April 1st, his license should be valid. If some problem happened within the Kansas DMV system that his license was no longer valid, it wasn't made valid again, let's say July 4th, he gets pulled over for speeding after the fireworks. And they run his license, and that license comes back suspended. They're going to arrest him. And he's got to go to court. It's incumbent upon him to prove that his license was valid on that date and time, because my computer, as a policeman, is telling me that license was not valid. So I can only act as an officer based upon what I see in front of me. And what I see in front of me is going to be depicted on my computer screen in my car. So as long as I'm acting reasonably and I have a lawful reason to be there, then that arrest, that's going to work. So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about, is the warrant actually good? We just make the arrest. Somebody else gets to figure that out down the line. So do these make sense? And there's other categories and there's other examples, but these are the biggest ones. Hot pursuit, evidence destruction, well-being, well-being checks or making sure somebody's not in danger, like that crazy example at the house with the girl screaming. That was actually kind of funny, really, that night. We kind of laughed about that, as did they eventually. And that protective sweep, we do not need a warrant for these things. We don't need a warrant. So you add these to those other 5 categories of warrantless searches: the plain view, the consent, incident to arrest, the stop and frisk. There's a lot of circumstances when we're not going to need that warrant to make some kind of a search. So this is important to remember, that this is a big part of what we do as policemen. Make sense? I know it does, because you guys are all awake and you're sharp, and that's good. It's going to make sense. All right, any questions about that? And we'll come back and review this later, but this is going to be a big part of being a policeman. This is a big part of it. One of my favorite things to talk about. I've got some good video for this, so I'm not going to talk the whole time, but we'll just introduce it today. I'd like you to read this just real quick. You cannot read a person's mind to determine intent. Intent is inferred from conduct. Intent is inferred from conduct. What this means is, as a police officer, as a correctional officer, but more as a police officer, well, as a correctional officer probably too, I'm going to have to be alert and aware of surroundings and behavior and be able to pick up on things as I'm dealing with people. That's going to be the indicator that's going to tell me what I'm going to need to do. I can't read somebody's mind. I can look at their eyes, and I can watch their hands, and I can watch their demeanor in terms of, as I'm standing there talking to them, are they getting into that posture where they're gonna lash out at me? You can tell if somebody's getting ready to slug you, I think. Not that many people are as quick as Bruce Lee, where they're just going to be able to throw a punch or a front kick or something like that and hit you out of nowhere. Most of the time, you're going to know when you're about to get hit. And these are things that policemen have to really learn how to pick up on. You have to have that almost like a sixth sense. But I can't read a mind, so I have to watch and infer what they're going to do based upon their conduct. Now, what do you think? Would you kill those backlights just for a minute, please? Just turn the back 2 off. What do you think his intent is right here? Let's see. I want to get that on the screen so Angel sees that. What do you think his intent is? This good-looking gentleman right here. Well, he's holding a bottle in his hand, and he's about to crack that officer in the head with the bottle. I would say his intent is pretty clear. His intent is, bless you, his intent is to assault that officer. Can a beer bottle across the top of the head create a fatal assault? I would think so. I would think so. So at this point, that officer should be able to look at this individual, especially his face. He looks angry. His friends are actually trying to stop him. You see a guy, one of his buddies, grabbing his arm. This fat guy right here, no telling what he's trying to do. He's laughing. I think these guys are all laughing like, hey, check it out. Bobby's about to hit the cop. So I think this officer is in a lot of trouble right here. But I think he can infer. So at that point, as a police officer, guess what? I can take extraordinary measures to protect myself. I can take extraordinary measures to protect myself. One thing with the cases, and we're only going to touch upon use of force in this class, but for this class, but one thing that you're going to see that is a big part of the cases is that, especially the Graham versus Connor case, they're looking not just at the circumstances, but they look at what the officer's perception was. And it's kind of removing this idea from that use of force. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you use some type of police force, whether you tase somebody, would you kick those backlights on for me, bud? There you go. Whether you tase somebody, you shoot somebody, you crack them with your nightstick, whatever it is that you do, that is some type of force, you're going to make that decision to do that on the spot. You're not going to stand back as you're dealing with somebody trying to arrest them. Hey, you're under arrest. No, I'm not. Well, then you need to make that decision what you're going to do at that point. Yeah, you are under arrest, and you're going to see where this is going to go later. But you make that decision quick. You don't stand back and think about it for an hour. Well, what do? Do I reach for my taser? Do I use my nightstick? Do I tell him he's under arrest like 18 times before I finally put him in handcuffs? Hey, when I was a policeman, I told you once, you're under arrest. If you decide you're not going to be under arrest, then we're going to make you under arrest. And that's the way I viewed it as a policeman. There's not going to be 20 different requests, put your hands behind your back. You get 1 or 2 requests, get those hands behind your back right now, or I'm going to put your hands behind your back. So you're going to see where that attitude falls into the use of force. But what this is saying is that it's not fair to judge what an officer did, because when you use some kind of force, there's going to be people just like you in this room. There's going to be groups of people that are going to second, third, and 10th guess you in terms of what you did. They're going to break down that decision to shoot somebody, which happens in the blink of an eye. They're going to break down that decision that you made to shoot somebody for years and years. And they're going to decide if you were right or wrong, and they were never there. Maybe they were never policemen. They've never had a gun in their hand. They've never had to fight with somebody. So people are going to be making decisions about what you did, your decision that you made, from that theoretical, sanitized world of imagining what it was like to make that decision. And you're going to see that one case, the Graham versus Connor case, kind of takes a little bit of that acumen away from the decision-making process for the people that are going to look at what we did. Does that make sense? All right, good. Police work is dangerous. There's no way around it. It's dangerous to be a policeman. It's dangerous to be a bad guy, but it's dangerous to be a policeman. In different years, different numbers of officers have been killed. Bad year for policemen, even worse year in terms of gunfire. 2014 is going to be way up there in terms of officers killed by gunfire. It's going to eclipse and probably go past that by about 20 murders. There was just a lot of policemen killed in 2014, including a couple here in Kansas. Well, in 2013 and 14 in Kansas. So we have seen that violence against police officers has actually gone up alarmingly. So that's way too many policemen to be killed. 179 in 1 year. 2011 was a bad year. But it's a dangerous job. It's a dangerous job. And we take that danger onto ourselves when we take the job in the first place. That's why we wear a bulletproof vest. That's why we carry a gun and all the other stuff that we do. But another piece of the arsenal that we have is the ability to use force to protect ourselves and to effect what we need to effect while we're conducting our business. We have a right to use force. It's a legal, statutory right that the state of Kansas or the state of Montana or the state of Illinois gives you. When you swear in and you become a police officer and they put that badge on your chest, you have that right to use force in a number of different situations. Whether it's force in making an arrest, maybe it's force protecting yourself, maybe it's force on somebody protecting them from someone else. But we have that state-given right to be able to use force. Now, it doesn't say that we can use illegal or excessive force. It just says we can use force. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to define the different types of force that police officers use. We're going to look just real briefly at illegal versus excessive force. And we're going to talk about 2 cases that anybody that wants to be a policeman, police officer, I should say, anybody that wants to be a police officer should be able to quote these 2 cases, chapter and verse. One is Graham versus Connor. One is Tennessee versus Garner. Tennessee versus Garner changed everything in 1985 in terms of the police and how they get to use deadly force. It's based in state law. So, one more comment, and then we're gonna close it up for the day. Force is physical most of the time. It's physical. It's exerting our will. It could be restraint. It could be doing something to protect myself. It doesn't have to be, it's not emotional. It's not meant to be any kind of economic force. We're not trying to make people feel uncomfortable when it comes to the use of force. We have one goal, and one goal only when we use some kind of force, and that is exerting our will upon somebody else, and in many circumstances making them do what we want them to do, forcing them to do what we want them to do. You're under arrest. No, I'm not. Well, yeah, you are. Get those hands behind your back. And you're going to see that when we look at the ladder of force, depending on where you work, I may have to put my hands on him first to arrest him, or if you come from where I came from, you're under arrest. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. Shh. I can spray you with pepper spray where I'm from without ever laying a finger on you when I'm making an arrest. So we're going to talk about what that means. That's the ladder of force. That's the ladder of force. So we're going to hold it right there. We're going to go back on Friday, and we're going to look at the ladder of force. And on Friday, we're going to get through both of those cases, Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. So when you walk out of here on Friday, you're going to be an expert when it comes to the use of force by a police officer, because you're going to understand what force is. You will definitely understand why it is important and why we spend time on it in a class like this. And you're going to understand what your parameters are and what your limitations are in terms of using force as a law enforcement officer. Any questions? We're done for the day. And that's a good thing, being done for the day. Because now you guys can go work out. You can do what you got to do.